Hola muchachos, ¿qué tal? Buenos días, aquí tienen el horario para hoy, lunes, el 8 de mayo. No homework was due for today, no homework due for next class. Our daily agenda begins with our warm-up on the difference in use between the preterite and the imperfect. Highlights of the notes that we took last class are right here in this graphic, and it can also be found on page 248 of the textbook. 248 of the textbook talks about how the imperfect and the preterite can be used together. Imperfect used to describe a situation. Imperfect used to provide background information. Imperfect used to create the setting. And then within that setting, the preterite is used to talk about completed actions, things that happened or events that took place within the overall setting that is expressed in the imperfect tense. So that's generally how the imperfect and the preterite are used together. More specifically, the imperfect can be used when we talk about time, weather, and physical, mental, emotional states. Time, eran las 5 de la mañana. Weather, llovía mucho, it was raining a lot. And physical, mental, and emotional states of being, how people felt or were feeling in the past. Estar, to be sad, happy, or tired. Parecer, the verb to appear or seem, to seem tired or bad. Sentirse, the verb to feel good or sick. Tener, the verb to have, but can be used in different contexts, such as these. Be the verb to be, for example, to be hot, to be cold, to be hungry, to be thirsty, and to be tired. So when we're describing our physical, mental, and emotional states, these verbs are inherently in the imperfect because you're describing states of being in the past. This video we'll watch together that will quickly summarize the notes that are here on page 248. But let's go ahead and take a look at the warm-up first, in which you guys are going to fill in the blanks with either the correct conjugation in the imperfect, and there you have your imperfect tense endings, or the preterite, which can be found on pages 110 and 140. Number 1, it was 3 in the morning when I arrived home. Eran las 3 de la mañana. Eran, E-R-A-N. Las 3 de la mañana cuando yo llegué. L-L-E-G-U-E with an accent. Ser is in the imperfect because we're referring to time in the past. And llegar is in the preterite because llegar is one of those verbs that's more often than not going to be in the preterite because we're talking about a completed action, right? Talking about what happened within this background setting. All right, going back to number 2 here. Blank calor y sol ayer por la tarde. It was sunny and hot yesterday afternoon. Hacía sol y calor ayer por la tarde. Hacía because we're describing what the weather was like in the past. Hacía calor y sol. Describing the weather. All right, number 3. Ayer mi hermano practicar la guitarra. Ser las 4:30 de la tarde. Yesterday my brother practiced the guitar. Completed action in the preterite. practicó. Ayer mi hermano practicó la guitarra. Eran, just like number one, talking about time. Eran las 4:30 de la tarde. All right, the last one, number 4. This is an act in progress. This is an example of this. We're describing a situation in the imperfect, and then another action happened or took place within that setting. Imperfect, to describe the situation. Preterite, to indicate something that happened and is viewed as completed and taking place within the situation described in the imperfect. So, back to our example for number 4. Ayer mi hermano practicaba la guitarra cuando mi madre nos llamó a cenar. Llamó because our subject is mi madre. My mother called who? My mother called us. This is not your subject. This is an indirect object pronoun. Madre, mi madre would be the él, ella, usted form, and the él, ella, usted form of the verb llamar in the preterite would be llamó. Ayer mi hermano practicaba la guitarra cuando mi madre nos llamó. All right, let's go ahead and go to the guided practice activity, exercise 12 on page 248, which is at the very bottom of that same page where I had you all take notes. For exercise 12, the question is ¿Qué hora era? Asking at what time. And you're going to indicate at what time the following weather events took place. And the weather events themselves you can find in the key vocabulary at the very end of the chapter in page 262. El huracán, la tormenta de lluvia, el incendio, la explosión. Along the left column is where you're going to find most all the weather occurrences or the weather events for this activity. So let's go ahead and take a look at page 248 and do the first few together. Taking a look at the example, you actually are only responsible for part B. I'll do part A, and you do part B. All right, for example, ¿Qué hora era cuando comenzó la tormenta de nieve? What time was it when the snowstorm began? Eran las 4 de la tarde. Eran las 4 de la tarde cuando comenzó, and I want you to include the weather event at the very end, which would be la tormenta de nieve. All right, let's do the first few together, the first 3 together, 4, 5, and 6. I'll have you do on your own, but I'll give you the questions for all of them so you know what the weather event is. Number 1, ¿Qué hora era cuando comenzó la tormenta de lluvia? Is this weather event, so we're going to replace la tormenta de nieve, which is a snowstorm, with la tormenta de lluvia. Is a rainstorm. ¿Qué hora era cuando comenzó la tormenta de lluvia? Using the information here to begin the response. Eran las 6 de la tarde, or eran las 6 de la noche, cuando comenzó la tormenta de lluvia. Número 2. ¿Qué hora era cuando comenzó la inundación? ¿Qué hora era cuando comenzó la inundación? What time was it when the flood began? Using the information in the picture, eran las 4:30 or eran las 4:30 de la tarde cuando comenzó la inundación. Number 3, ¿qué hora era cuando comenzó el incendio? A fire. ¿Qué hora era cuando comenzó el incendio? Eran las 2:15 o eran las 2:15 de la tarde cuando comenzó el incendio. And the last 3 questions I'll have you do on your own. The responses, rather, I'll have you do on your own. The questions for each of these. ¿Qué hora era cuando comenzó el terremoto? Terremoto for number 4. ¿Qué hora era cuando comenzó la explosión? La explosión for number 5. And finally, ¿qué hora era cuando comenzó el huracán? El huracán. Excuse me, for número 6. All right, that is exercise 12. The last thing we're going to do is a guided reading there. La Cenicienta, practicing the use of the imperfect and the preterite together. And really, it's demonstrative of how the imperfect is used in a story, in this case, Cinderella. The imperfect is used to provide the background information, to set the stage, to paint the picture of the story itself, of Cinderella, and then everything that transpires in the story within that setting is going to be more or less in the preterite being viewed as a completed action in the past. So taking a look at the hyperlink there, clicking on the hyperlink where it says La Cenicienta, it's going to take you to this website where you have a few stories to choose from. La Cenicienta is right there. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. What I'd like you to do for this assignment is I'd like you to see if you can identify 5 verbs in the imperfect and 1 verb, the first verb, in the preterite that shows up. Now, just to reiterate, conjugations for the preterite and the imperfect, as alluded to, actually, why don't I do that? As alluded to in the warm-up, you can go to pages 194 and 196 for the imperfect conjugations, those Lady Gaga, Poker Face lyric endings that you may recall. Preterite conjugations can be found on pages 110 and 140 from quarter 3 that we looked at those. So armed with those pages and the notes that you took on them, let's go ahead and go back to the story. In the first 3 sections, lines, if you will, beginning with hace muchos años, all the way to ellas, the end of that 3rd sentence there, 3rd paragraph. See if you can identify 5 verbs conjugated in the imperfect. I'll pause the video for a moment so you can do that, and then we'll go over your answers. 5 verbs that are conjugated in the imperfecto. And they're using the imperfecto at the very beginning of the story because the imperfect is used to describe a situation that existed in the past to provide background information. All right, go ahead and see if these first 3 sentences you can identify 5 examples of verbs in the imperfect. All right, y'all, let's go ahead and see if we can identify those 5 examples of verbs in the imperfect. First example, hace muchos años en un lejano país había. Ia is an imperfect ending there. Remember, an I with an accent is an ER, an IR verb ending in the imperfect. Había una preciosa muchacha de ojos verdes y rubia melena. Rubia is an adjective. It means blonde. It's not a verb in the imperfect because we don't have that accent above the I there. All right, so 1 example so far. Además de bella, Era una joven tierna que trataba a todo el mundo con amabilidad y siempre tenía una sonrisa en los labios. Era is our first example in the second sentence. This is the verb ser in the imperfect, how we saw from earlier on when we were telling time, right, in the past. Trataba and tenía are all examples in the imperfects. We have 4. Vivía, the verb vivir in the imperfect. Con su madrastra, una mujer déspota y mandona que tenía, once again, tener in the imperfect. 2 hijas tan ingreídas como insoportables, feas y desgarbadas, despreciaban a la dulce muchachita porque no soportaban que fuera más hermosa que ellas. So a lot of examples there in the imperfect to identify, and this isn't reading comprehension. This is rather recognition of the imperfect in context. And then our first example of a verb in the preterite, I'm going to find until the 4th paragraph here where it says, un día, one day, llegó a la casa una carta proveniente del palacio. A letter arrived from the palace to their home. Completed action. No longer providing the background information, but talking about actions that, things that happened, right? Actions that were completed within that background setting. So, Cenicienta, Cinderella, and all the other stories here that are provided here are great examples of how the imperfect is used at the beginning to describe or provide background information, and then the preterite is used to kind of chronicle or journal the events that take place within that story. So great practice there for you, and it's right out of the Spanish 3 textbook, if you will, an activity similar to that. All right, no homework due for today, no homework due for next class. Nos vemos. Adios.